everyone. Welcome to the African Podcast TV. This podcast is about Africa, regarding the political side, the historical side, the cultural side, and so many more. Each week, I deliver my best thought and analysis regarding Africa. Here, your host, Amaduba. Before I introduce you to my guest, I would like to wish you Happy New Year. I wish you, all of you and your family, Happy New Year. Hopefully, this year going to be much, much better in the good side than the last year. Thank you again for joining me this weekend on African Podcast TV. I would like to introduce you to my guest. My guest is Mr. Anthony Kwaku Ohemeng-Boamah. He is the United Nations resident coordinator and representative of the United Nations Secretary General. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me this weekend on African Podcast TV.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, and Happy New Year to you as well, and Happy New Year to your guests
Thank
and
you so much,
spectators.
sir. Thank you. We are here to talk about sustainable development in Africa, something really interesting for the African people and to us, to all of us. So let's talk about the challenges, the issues, and how to fix them and how to solve some of them. And before that, just let's talk about 2020, sir. What analysis do you have for the year 2020, and what is your outlook in general for Africa?
Um, Let me begin by saying that 2020 has been a lot of has been a challenging year, not only for Africa but for the world. If you go back to say 10 years prior to 2020, most of the African continent was on a positive growth trajectory. Poverty was going down.
Mhm,
We saw growth, and we saw qualitative growth in many countries.
mhm,
And from the UN point of view, we would say that most of the countries were doing very well in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals.
mhm,
But with the onset of the coronavirus in 2020,
mhm,
impact on the economy, on society in general,
mhm,
I think it has had a negative impact on this growth trajectory. And in fact, we are worried that some countries might see poverty creeping up again.
mhm,
Um, some studies even do indicate that it might take some countries about 3 or 4 years to get back to where they were before 2020. And
mhm,
so it's a bit disturbing. But
mhm,
on the whole, I think we can be positive. Some of these occurrences in the lives of nations also give an opportunity to build back better.
mhm.
And I think we can learn lessons on what to do better in terms of arranging production on the continent, not sourcing everything from outside the continent,
Mhm,
um, putting a lot more emphasis on social protection systems,
mhm,
making sure that we have the infrastructure and the qualified personnel in the healthcare, so that we would be able to be more resilient if we should confront these kinds of challenges in the lives of our countries.
mhm,
So yes, 2020 was a challenge, but I think we can always be optimistic and think that, particularly with vaccines on the horizon, 2021 and the years after that will be positive compared to 2020.
mhm. Yes, really interesting what you said, especially about the sustainable development goals. And we see that 2020, when COVID-19 hit the world, especially in Africa, the most of the countries in Africa know really trying to know how to take care of this COVID-19, and the most of the country definitely did very a good job regarding COVID-19, even though the most of the country has to wait the most of the things to come in from outside the continent. So in your mind, in your knowledge, so what do you think Africa should do next time, not to wait something from outside the continent to come and help them, or to try to put some system in place?
I think the best way to confront any challenge, whether it's health, whether it's in the economy, obviously, is to have national assets. And by national assets, if you take this particular challenge which emerged in the health sector, we need good hospitals and staff. And by hospitals, I don't mean just big infrastructures in the regional capitals. We need all those basic healthcare in the rural areas that allow people to be able to have service.
Mm-hmm.
And we need the qualified personnel. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's extremely important. Um, we have also seen that one of the responses to the onset of COVID was to basically close down a whole bunch of the economic activity.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our brothers and sisters in Africa, if they don't go out to work for one day, they find it very difficult to actually live. And so the whole issues of social protection come into play. What are our countries doing to ensure that the basic minimum could be afforded to our citizens if there's a national emergency where everybody has to stay home? So I think this was also a lesson that we learned uh, uh, from this particular epidemic. The third element, which I also think is very important, is the whole issue of communication. Um, is the whole issue of communication, because I think when you have a national emergency, it's not the leadership telling people just
Mm-hmm.
what the people have to know their own role in making sure that everybody contributes to managing that national emergency. The fourth element,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is also very important, is that Africa has a lot of porous borders. So it's always very good to synchronize and make sure that we adopt similar policies going forward to ensure that at least we are all managing whatever problem it is in a systematic way. I mean, for me, these four things are very important, but there are other things that our countries can do to ensure that we do better. I think basic scientific research, some of these things we should be able to set them up and be able to do certain analytical things and begin to also fend for ourselves in terms of coming up with solutions. We shouldn't always wait for the vaccine to come from somewhere else. I think we do have
Mm-hmm.
intellectuals, and we should give them what it takes to be able to also start thinking about some of these things and producing solutions for our problems. So I will just leave it
Mm-hmm.
at these five elements, which I think are very important.
Okay, really interesting. Let's talk about again the sustainable development goals, because if we're talking about those, we're talking about end the hunger, zero poverty, healthcare, education. So, what are the impact of sustainable development goals in Africa, and how can sustainable development reduce poverty?
Well, I mean, as you may know, the Sustainable Development Goals, actually the Agenda 2030, with those 17 goals were adopted in 2015 by the whole world at the UN.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are probably three important elements in the whole thing. The first thing is a paradigm shift. I think the conception of development, particularly sustainable human development, we want our countries to take it seriously. It's not just growth, but qualitative growth. And by that, I mean that a country can grow, but if you are growing and you still have poverty growing in that country, it's not qualitative growth. So the whole issues of equity come into play. There's also a second element, which I think it's very important, and that is the whole aspect of environment. The whole production patterns in the world, most of the production patterns are built on the environment. So the idea is to produce without abusing the environment, and also taking into consideration that there is a future generation which should also have access uh, to factors of production, just like the current generation. So there is the whole issue of looking at environmental considerations in production consumption patterns, which is a great element of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the third element, which I want to speak briefly about, is the whole issue of partnership. Um, the world as we see it now is a global village. If we needed to be reminded about it, COVID-19 started somewhere, and in a matter of months, it was all over the place. And so there is built into the Sustainable Development Goals the idea of international cooperation, the idea of partnership to ensure that certain things we call global goods, we are able to think about them in a global manner and also ensure that we provide a solution which will not be detrimental to, say, developing countries while favoring developed countries. So these are three building blocks in the Sustainable Development Goals paradigm, which I think are very important. You did raise the important issue of poverty. Over the past 25 years, in most developed countries, most of the Western countries, there have been growth, and you have seen either the middle income people have been stable, or people at the bottom are actually falling off the growth ladder. I think for a country to be stable, to be peaceful, and to be able to actually bring everybody into identifying with the development objectives of the country, poverty is something that we have to take very seriously. And so, cross-cutting in the whole Sustainable Development Goal agenda is how do you actually reduce poverty? And by reducing poverty means ensuring that we think seriously about those three big pillars that I just put across.
Mhm. Yes, let's talk about partnership because we know that Africa, the most of the time, Africa has been having a lot of partnership with we can talk about China, we can talk about United States of America. So how do you see partnership with Africa, and how do you, in your knowledge, what do you think so Africa should change regarding the partnership with the other countries or continent?
Well, I think if you look at the economic history of Africa, we have always been looking outside. We have always been exporting mostly raw materials. We don't contribute very much to global trade. It's probably about 2 or 3%. And I think what is very important when we talk about partnership in Africa, and it's very good that the African Continental Free Trade Zone has now come into operation. I think one, we have to trade with each other more. In my introduction, I did talk about ensuring that we have production patterns and systems which ensure that we do produce most of the things that we need. And that could mean that you import raw materials from, say, Nigeria, you produce in Ghana, and you can sell in Cote d'Ivoire. You make sure that we have the systems within the continent to be able to produce, share, probably encourage the free movement of expertise to where we need them to ensure that this production takes place. So for me, the most important thing for Africa is to stop looking outward. We should look within the continent, and we should put in place the production patterns that allow us to produce. And then obviously, secondly, to trade with each other more so that we generate the wealth within the continent and to increase, job creation. And to do all these things, obviously, we have to get the policies right. We also need infrastructure that allows, the free movement or facilitates the free movement of goods and people within the continent. So that is that bit when it comes to Africa. But, within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, and as I indicated previously, we are all in a global village. If there is pollution in a particular country, the pollution doesn't stay in that country. So there is that bit of partnership to make sure that if we want to reduce pollution, there are mechanisms for those who are over polluting to pay for the pollution, and also to compensate those who are not polluting. I think that is also part of the global partnership. There is also that partnership, which is also built on international cooperation. Most African countries receive aid or various sources of technical cooperation from other countries. So the whole idea is to enhance those elements as well, and to make sure that there's a mutual stake in making sure that the whole world grows. We reduce poverty. We have an inclusive kind of growth, and make the world more stable for everybody else. Obviously,
mhm,
people might say that this is idealism, but obviously, it's always a good thing to be idealistic in terms of projecting what we can do together as a people, as a global community, and to make sure that we can do those things because they are doable. I mean, it might sound as if it's a dream, but I think they are all
mhm,
achievable. They are doable. This world has immense technology to do a lot of these things I'm talking about. There's immense wealth to do some of these things I'm talking about. So we just have to have that global solidarity to be able to make sure that at least we reorganize the international cooperation in a different manner to benefit
mhm,
those who are not benefiting from the increased growth that we are seeing in the world.
mhm. Good. Let's talk about again, because I know that you have been doing this for a long time, and this you have been working in the UN and in the sustainable development program in Africa for a long time. So again, in your knowledge or your expertise, what does Africa need to do to develop, and how do you improve sustainable development program in Africa?
Yeah, obviously, the SDG paradigm, we have 17 goals. Every country, what we encourage them to do is to have a lot more comprehensive development programs. Um, in Mauritania, we have a prioritization of the sustainable development goals to help the country develop its own development program. And some of the priorities that come across reducing poverty, zero hunger,
Mhm,
gender equality. And so the country develops a development program with those priorities highlighted and then ensures that the budgetary process is aligned because you do a program without actually putting the resources, it wouldn't get you anywhere.
mhm,
And so what the UN helps or comes in to do is obviously the programming itself, some of the budgetary alignment, and also help in the mobilization of resources along the lines of the international partnerships that I put across.
mhm,
So, in a nutshell, that is what we do. We try to help our countries to get the programming right, put the right focus based on the key challenges within that country, align their resources to make sure that they can actually deliver on the programs, and then help mobilize partners. And by partners, I don't always mean international partners. I mean even domestic partners, because we have the private sector here, we have civil society in Mauritania, and they can all contribute to the development process. To give you a concrete
mhm,
example, you are from originally from Guinea, so I think you know the role of zakat in Islamic,
mhm,
for instance. Uh,
mhm,
Zakat is a contribution, kind of a social welfare. One of the things we are trying to do in Mauritania is to modernize zakat so that you can actually have an institutional structure around zakat to mobilize the
mhm.
resources and to actually put them back into priority programming for poor people and to help in developing certain sectors of the country. So these are some of the things that we do when we talk about sustainable development goals and actually integrated development planning to ensure that our countries think about everything, put focus on what really can make a change,
Mhm.
and then align budget resources and also mobilize internally and externally.
Okay, so we know that if we're talking about sustainable development or development program, in the other hand, we are talking about government stability of the government. We talk about again education, healthcare. That's some of the issues. So, in your knowledge, so what are the problems in Africa regarding the development, sustainable development in Africa, and how to solve them all those problems?
Well, obviously, there are different. There's a continuum with countries on different parts of the continuum. We have countries like Central African Republic. which
Mhm.
are emerging out of crisis, where the whole issue of political stability and governance is extremely important. I am in Mauritania, which is pretty more stable. We're making sure that Mauritania, we are halfway in the desert, halfway in the Sahel. So environmental considerations, for instance, here are extremely important. But across the board, most African countries need to create jobs and we need to reduce poverty. So in most of
Mhm.
the integrated programs that you will see in many of the African countries, you might see a component to ensure that there is stability, the governance bit. You would see a component on pro-poor growth, meaning a lot more economic development programs that put emphasis on quality, meaning some of the distributive aspects of growth. And then you will see a whole chunk also on infrastructural development, because you also have to build
Mhm.
the productive capacity of our countries to be able to produce, create jobs, and also maintain growth. So these are some
I'm
of the
sorry,
key elements.
sir. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir. But the most of the time we have been hearing saying that we have to create jobs and end the poverty. But the most of the time people don't know what system to put in place to create more jobs and to end the poverty, because I've been hearing for a long time, for many years.
Mhm.
I will see some programs put in place, some of them, and then after a little while, it's not going, it's not moving forward. But just as someone who has been doing this for a long time, so what do you think we should put in place, like program system, so that we can move forward little by little, sir?
Well, the most important is to have stability in the countries, and I think I spoke about it. If a country is not stable, there will be no investment in the country. Even the citizens will not invest their money.
Mhm.
So the whole political governance architecture is extremely important.
Mhm.
And you come from Guinea originally. One of the
Mhm.
reasons why Guinea is not making great strides is the whole issue of political instability. Guinea has bauxite, the richest bauxite deposits in the world, which have never been mined. Because if
Yeah.
you are unstable, you wouldn't get an investment to
Mhm.
actually help you get it out of the ground and then start creating jobs or doing a production chain that ensures that there is growth, a certain growth momentum in the country. So
Mhm.
the bedrock of the development process is stability. And most of our countries, given the nature of our politics, might not be stable. That is one. The second bit that I spoke about is thinking seriously about creating production chains in Africa.
Yes.
We should move away from exporting raw materials and try to establish industries that add value to what we produce. Botswana doesn't export raw diamonds anymore. It's
Mhm.
adding value to diamonds. Those are the sort of things we have to do. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire produce 70% of the world's cocoa. How much do we produce in terms of the world's chocolate? These are the sort of things we have to think about, because there's a lot more value addition in producing chocolate than exporting the raw cocoa. And when you add value, you also create jobs. So these are some of the things we have to do to make sure that we are creating production patterns, creating jobs, and eventually helping to reduce poverty. We will not reduce poverty by distributing money. We will reduce poverty, obviously, by building on the human capital that we have in the country, meaning good health, good education, setting up production patterns that allow people to get jobs, reinforcing the whole African free trade mechanism. We trade with each
Mhm.
other more. We develop production patterns that allow us to source within the continent. And by doing those things, obviously, I think we will be able to help reduce poverty. It is
Mhm.
not something that will happen overnight. I gave you the example of Botswana, which is doing very, very well. Even countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana are even also trying to now add value to cocoa. So these are the sort of things we have to do. But to be able to do it, obviously, as the French say, if we're on projet d'etat, there has to be
Mhm,
the national mindset of where we want to go. And you
mhm,
need that by building coalitions, building stability, having very good governance and political systems in place that ensures that gradually, no matter who is in power, we build on what was there before instead of destroying what we find when we come into
mhm,
power.
mhm. Good, really interesting, sir. That's really interesting. So, how can we improve more our system education and healthcare?
Well, it's a it's a multi-million dollar question. But if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, there's been a costing element that in most African countries, if you want to educate everybody from the primary through the secondary level, you have to put in about $300 per child per year. Um, that is the costing for most of these countries in order to have 100% education, primary school through high school. Most of our countries have a GDP per capita of, say, 1,500. So if you have to take 300 per student, you know that that is a big chunk of the whole pot of resources that the country has for development. And that is why I spoke initially about the importance of really doing an integrated development framework along the sustainable development goals, aligning your priorities, aligning your budget, and then looking at the other complementary resources that have to come from internally or from outside to make sure that we move along. But yes,
Mhm,
we need to educate our children. We have to educate our children. Most of our countries are also moving towards the lines of universal healthcare. And I personally believe that it has been proven. Maybe 25 years ago in Africa, there was something called the Bamako Initiative. The
mhm,
Bamako Initiative was simply making sure that we had very good, well staffed community health centers in our villages. Because when it was proven that when you do have those well-staffed community health centers, you are able to actually produce a very healthy population instead of building big hospitals, probably 500 kilometers away from where the people are. So these are some of the elements that our countries have to think through and actually produce. I also spoke about making sure that we have social safety networks within our countries. And COVID has proven that most of our countries, we don't have those things. And I think there are blueprints that can help us develop these things. They are not costly. It's a matter of really thinking seriously about where we want to take our countries and beginning to put some of these building blocks in place. And I think, yes, if we educate our people, we provide that basic health services that allows us to be able to treat them in their villages, we will avoid a whole bunch of the more serious diseases. And if we are able to do these things, including some of the economic production things that we already talked about, I think we
mhm.
will be able to make a dent on ensuring that we have healthy and well-educated populations in our countries.
Good. So, what are the challenges that face Africa in the long term or the short term regarding sustainable development program and how to change those challenges so they will benefit more the African people?
You cannot do anything without governance and political stability. So that is
Okay.
one. I think
Okay.
it's important that whatever governance process we have in our countries, we ensure there is a full buy-in by all the population, and we will reduce violence because
Mhm.
without that stability, we cannot do anything else. That is one. Two, I think it's important that we become a lot more self-reliant. meaning that we have to think first what we can do for ourselves, provide for ourselves, before always, radiating it outside as to what can come from outside. So that bit of self-reliance, we have to build it. We have to do it. Guinea-Bissau, before independence, used to export rice. Now Guinea-Bissau imports rice. We have to change those patterns. That is part of building that reliance bit. I believe also that we have to take the whole issue of African integration seriously. We are very small countries which cannot be very competitive in the global arena. But pooling resources, opening up the market, changing the production patterns, we will become very competitive. And when you talk about Africa, you might also always talk about the whole issue of corruption. There's
Yes.
about 30 to 36 billion dollars every year illicit flows that goes outside the continent. And I think we have to make sure that we reduce some of these illicit flows so that the resources can be reinvested back into Africa. And there are a few other things that we can change, particularly the integration of minorities, women, and all these things into the production patterns. I think we have a lot more resourceful women on this continent, and it's a matter of making sure that their place and role within our societies are continuously enhanced for them to also contribute to the development process. These are some of the things that I see, but obviously there's the whole technological challenge. The world is evolving. Most of the production patterns are based on technology now. And so you asked about education. We have to educate our children differently. The whole IT and everything, which are becoming the bedrock of efficient production patterns, we have to get those things in the educational system for our children to learn. I think that is also very, very important. I spoke about the environment. Everybody talks about the environment these days. We talk about climate change. If we are not very careful and we don't manage these things well, they can actually change the whole production patterns. And that would obviously cause a lot of trouble because as a continent, we adapt very slowly. We don't have the resources to be able to adapt when there is a big challenge. And that is why we have to plan and anticipate a little bit better. So these are some of the key challenges I see on the horizon. But I believe that with determination, we can overcome all these things. But we have
Yes.
to build that political stability within our countries.
Mhm. So talking about that, because I just would like you to add more regarding, because that was going to be my next question, talking about women's, because nowadays we know that if we talk about like agriculture, the most of the time women has been playing a big role in agriculture. And agriculture has been one of the main things to help the continent or a country to develop. So
Yeah.
in your knowledge, what is the role of the woman in the sustainable development role program in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've said something which is very, very important. I mean, agriculture
Yeah.
is extremely important for the development of our countries, for feeding ourselves. I mean, instead of importing rice all the time, we can produce it, and also as a raw material for building an industrial base. I think there is no way we can leapfrog that if we don't take agriculture seriously. Women, as a category of the population, are the majority also in the agricultural sector, but they always tend to be in subsistence farming. And so some of the things that we have discussed, I think, are also very pertinent. Um, Education, if we, for instance, we educate our women and they are in farming, obviously it will be a lot more modernized form of farming. So education plays a role. Access to bank credits, I think, is also extremely important. Changing some of the land tenure systems, because in some of our countries, um, the land tenure, how access to land, acquiring land, ownership of land is a bit more complicated and they don't lend themselves to modern agriculture. So these are some of the things that we have to look at. And some of the traditional morals that holds women down. I mean, until quite recently, there are a few countries in Africa where a woman couldn't get a credit if the husband didn't sign off on it. Most of these
Mhm.
countries are now changing all these laws to ensure that we treat women equally, and they will be able to also apply for loans to do whatever business, economic ventures that they are interested in. I believe that women's education, changing the whole social perception of the role of women, access to credit, land tenure systems, I think would enhance their contribution and productivity in the agriculture sector, where, as you've already mentioned, a lot of women do participate in it, but on a subsistence level.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. We are about to end this interview. Would you like to add something? In case if I did not ask you a question about that, if you want to add something, so please do.
Well, I just would want to say that the Sustainable Development Goals, it was a 15-year program
Mm-hmm.
to the year 2030. We are in 2020, we have 10 more years. And I think there's a need for our countries to accelerate whatever they are doing, meaning that they have to take the whole integrated programming framework seriously. They have to flesh out more their own priorities. And I believe that with the creation of the continental free trade zone, it provides an opportunity also to relook at the whole production patterns and how Africa can trade with itself more, making sure that we generate wealth and we keep the wealth within the continent, and also as seed money for further development and economic growth. So that is what I would like to add, and I think it's important to talk to people like you in a forum like this, where I presume it's open to other Africans, so that we all think
Mm-hmm.
together in terms of what we can do to help our countries become more resilient and also put themselves on a positive development trajectory. So thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining me this week on African Podcast TV, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me this week on African Podcast TV. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Facebook, so you will never miss a show again. Thank you. See you.